Well, good afternoon. Welcome to the International Business Ethics Case Competition. My name is Ken Goodpaster. I'm the Uber judge for this session. And welcome to the University of Manitoba. And my background is that I am a teacher of business ethics, retired. I taught originally at the University of Notre Dame for 10 years and Harvard Business School here for 10 years, and for 25 years at the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota. That's where people turn blue with it instead of green. And I'm pleased to be with you as an emeritus professor. Would you please introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Matt Kelly, and I am not a compliance officer or a business ethics professor, but I publish a newsletter about corporate compliance and ethics issues, and I have been writing about it for 20 years and have come to know and love quite a lot of these issues that these companies deal with. And so I'm very happy to be here and was delighted when they asked me to help out.
We're delighted to have you. Thank you for your time. And we have two other judges, and they're online. And I'd like to ask them to introduce themselves. One of whom I believe is going to be typing to you rather than speaking aloud. And one of those judges is Justin Goodpin. Justin?
Yep. How you doing, everybody? My background is actually that I helped Tom White for many years back in the early 2000s with this case competition over at Loyola Marymount University. So it's near and dear to my heart. I know it very well, participated for several years as a judge. DraftKings is also a client of mine. I work in identity verification and anti-money laundering compliance. My company was recently purchased by a larger financial technology company called Plaid. And so this is very interesting to me personally.
Okay, great to have you. Thank you for your time. And Caroline Westerhoff?
Okay. I got an ethics scholarship 2 years ago as a faculty member from ethics and compliance. This is my second or third year doing judging, and I love the field. I was a tenured professor with the City University of New York, and I'm now doing a study on Boeings. It started with the 2 planes that went down, and every day now something new is happening.
Thank you for your time and thank you for joining us.
I've also been on the board of an international company and was involved in ethics.
So the setup for your presentation, as you already know, is this. In this part of the competition, you are taking on a fictional business identity and assigning a fictional business identity to the judges. Please make sure everyone knows who you are and who they are before you begin. You will have 25 minutes with a 5-minute cushion to describe the legal, financial, and ethical dimensions of the problem and to recommend a solution that passes muster on all 3 counts. During this time, teams will be uninterrupted. When you are finished, the judges will ask you questions for 20 minutes. During the Q&A, both you and the judges will stay in character. After the Q&A, the judges will give you feedback outside the role playing. Some important things to keep in mind. The ethical aspects of your analysis are the most important part. However, these should be described in a simple, practical, common sense fashion. Using technical philosophical terminology or basing your argument on religious or theological grounds will be considered a serious weakness. Similarly, any member of the team reading his or her part will be considered a major mistake, although you may use notes. During this presentation, every member of the team must have some sort of speaking role. And with that as the setup, I turn the floor over to you. Well,
So just to make clear who we are and who you guys are the board of DraftKings, and we are a consulting company coming to identify an ethical issue that we see for your company and how to deal with it.
So, hi everyone. I'd like to thank the board of DraftKings for having us here today at your headquarters in Boston. So my name is Laura Croker, and I'm here with my colleagues Eli Kulak and Remy Penner from Oasis Advisory. And we're here to talk about DraftKings' role as an industry leader in the high-stakes race for consumer protection. So this particular case is very interesting to me, as I have personal experience in the gaming industry for over a decade, and I've seen firsthand the wonderful things that regulated gaming can bring. And my colleagues Eli and Remy are both avid sports bettor fans. So while gaming sometimes has a reputation as being a vice industry, gaming is a right in the US. And human nature has an inherent love for both exciting and taking risks and excitement. So this is reflected in DraftKings' mission statement, as you fulfill a great purpose in meeting market demand for Americans' passionate love for sports with regulated gaming. So, however, you must take careful care to ensure responsible consumption and both your company's success. So while the US has recently legislated sports betting in recent years, that's because regulation provides a more ethical path forward. So providing ethical gambling means robust player protection, consumer awareness of risks, and adherence to both the spirit and the letter of law. So DraftKings, you have a wonderful position as a market leader to fulfill both the market demand for more exciting sports betting with more responsible gaming. So in looking at the US market in particular, America has a very strong demand of sports culture, as I mentioned. And the fact that the US Supreme Court has recently overturned the federal ban on sports gaming means that there's been a rapid expansion of legislation and growth in the past couple of years. So each year we see millions more users joining these sports books, with an expected 54 million users by the year 2029. And so together, this means that we're seeing a predicted 32% CAGR from the years of 2021 to 2026. And this is thanks to, as I mentioned, that strong love for sports, advanced technology, and both that ease and accessibility of having online sports gaming via mobile. So that means this is now something available to consumers 24/7 at the touch of a finger. So DraftKings has succeeded at fueling the spirit of sports fans and also generating significant tax revenue. So as you know, you already offer online sports betting in 25 states with the potential for more to become legalized. You've also succeeded at generating over 1.3 billion in public funds for good causes such as public education and state infrastructure. You've also done wonderful things for your shareholders, as your share price has increased by almost 5 times since your IPO in 2020. However, you've seen some significant losses in the past couple of years. And so because you are a publicly traded company, that means you have a lot of pressure in your operations to perform. Doesn't work anymore. As I mentioned, you're under a lot of pressure from the public, from your public shareholders to grow rapidly. And this growth can sometimes be at odds with player safety. So this quick growth means that you're in a competitive struggle for market share against other market entrants. So that means there's a very increased level of advertising in a lot of places with a very high level of frequency. So that combined with the fact that now sports bettors are able to access betting 24/7 at the touch of a finger on their mobile devices means that additional safeguards are required. So here we have the story of Noah Vinberg, who is a recovered gambling addict. And while his personal opinion is that gambling does not need to be prohibited, there should be additional safeguards, considering that gamblers are now exposed to these high level of advertisements. So when we look at your marketing behavior in particular, we've noted that currently DraftKings is targeting college-age males with some advertising that can be misleading. So if anyone here knows a college-age male, you'll know that they tend to be young, they tend to be impulsive, they may lack some financial education, and they also lack the life experience that might help them make better decisions in the future. So this means that strong safeguards are required to ethically acquire these statistically likely to be at-risk consumers. And so here on the right, we have an advertisement for your $1,000 bonus offer. However, to be eligible for this $1,000, there is actually a lot of fine print involved. And so again, looking at this at-risk player who doesn't have a lot of life experience and is very impulsive, it's unlikely that they're actually able to go through and read that fine print.
So this brings us to what is the actual ethical issue here? DraftKings is enticing inexperienced consumers with misleading marketing into a vice industry without the sufficient safeguards. But DraftKings has a strong base to be able to address this issue. You have the 5 player protection pledges that you can see on the screen here. Focusing on 2 of them, 1, responsible advertisement. You've committed to comply with state and federal advertising standards and to not have any sort of misleading advertising or deceptive claims. And then your pledge to the public is to provide them the tools to play responsibly and help players make informed choices. So while you're providing these tools, you're not fully able to live up to the promise this makes to consumers. So as Laura was mentioning with the concern about fine print, you provide these tools with the fine print and they're not able to, and your target demographic is not accustomed to dealing with this level of detail. And so this deceptive advertising gives consumers a false sense of security. Diving into one of your recent advertisements for a bonus of receiving $1,000 to be able to gamble more, the fine print, however, talks about how you have to be able to deposit $5,000 to be eligible for the bonus. You have to then wager $25,000 within 90 days to be eligible. And on top of that, these bets have to be made on wagers that have longer odds. Statistically, this means the bonus will never, the losses these consumers are going to see is going to outweigh the bonus that you're advertising they're going to get. And in fact, this is the subject of a class action lawsuit based around with the main principle being marketers of a known addictive product should be taking special precautions. So despite this lawsuit being brought, no laws have been broken. And the current legislation details a list of player protections that you must provide, and you are providing. However, these legislative protections are insufficient. For example, the voluntary cooling off period. This is a voluntary thing that consumers have to take control of themselves. And this is an issue for the most at-risk consumers. As you can see in your statement here, providing players with the tools, it's really pushing the onus onto the players to be responsible. You're providing tools, but it's up to them. And so unfortunately, the definition of a high-risk and at-risk consumer is ones that have impaired control. So you're giving them tools, but they're not able to make use of them. And so this means the current safeguards are not effective in dealing with the, are not effective. So as you can say, the majority of the bettors that you serve do gamble responsibly. However, 7% of your consumers are considered at risk and 2.6% are considered high risk consumers. Regulations are evolving in this young industry to deal with some of those lacking tools, but they're not adapting fast enough. In the first year of legalized sports betting, calls to state sports betting problem gambling networks rose more than 50%. So just to really bring this home to you, I'm going to pass it over to Laura to talk you through a consumer story.
So as you may have seen in the headlines lately, there's a story circulating around Kavita Fisher, who's a psychiatrist who lost almost $400,000 gambling on sports betting apps. So Kavita Fisher is a new online player, and she first began gambling with DraftKings because of the offer of that first-time bonus. Her quick and high level of engagement with DraftKings meant that she was soon awarded with VIP status. However, after a few months, she noticed that she was struggling with gambling and actually could no longer afford her mortgage because of her gambling habits. So she reached out to her DraftKings host to express concern and ask if it's possible to receive a loan to pay for her mortgage. He responded by pointing her out to the limit pools and saying that DraftKings takes responsible gambling very seriously and asked her to confirm if she was still gambling within her limits. Once she then replied, "Yes, I am," he rewarded her with a bonus to get her back in the action. She tried using those time limit features. However, as we mentioned, they don't always work for someone who's struggling with at-risk habits. And so she tried using those, but they were very effective. So every time her time limit expired, she'd hop right back on the app. Finally, 10 months later, after she lost almost $400,000, she reached out to her host to complain that she was struggling from compulsive gambling and requested her account be closed. At that point, her VIP host pointed out some addiction hotline numbers and some website links. So this means that DraftKings' misleading communication and poor internal controls has led to a negative consumer impact. So of course, transferring the burden of player protection onto the player themselves can lead to a number of significant long-term consequences. So for example, players such as Noah and Kavita risk bankruptcy, and they also risk many ruined relationships with partners, family, and friends. So it's clear that this ethical issue of enticing experienced consumers with a misleading marketing strategy into a vice industry without sufficient safeguards can grow, because we see this growing market, which means there's more and more players who will be exposed to this type of marketing and this type of engagement. And so there's a high possibility for increased lawsuits with stories that we see, such as Kavita's. And I'll pass it to my colleague, Rachel. So online gaming legislation is in its infancy and has yet to address all potential challenges. So since 2018, just a few years ago, 30 states have already legalized sports betting in the US. And there are 6 more states with active legislation on the table. So these are all young regulations that continue to adapt to a changing market as more concerns are addressed and as states learn from each other, as right now gaming regulations are legalized on a state-by-state basis. So while DraftKings is legally compliant, some of your actions are missing the intent of the law. So in this example here is the Pennsylvania regulation, which is where Kavita Fisher is located. And so the Pennsylvania regulation around player account controls requires that you have a clear mechanism for who to impose self-limitations on things like deposits, wagers, losses, and session durations. So while you did in fact do that, we can see that with Kavita, those controls were insufficient to help her curb her gambling problem. And so the intent of the gaming legislation is for players to make informed decisions and to help them control their habits. So again, as we saw with Kavita, these controls were not effective. So therefore, DraftKings should look towards the precedent that's been set in mature markets to be more proactive at avoiding these problems in the future. So if we look overseas, problem gambling is prompting regulatory crackdowns. So in Australia in particular, they recently banned the use of credit cards for online wagers. And so even though not all gamblers who make wagers online are with credit cards are doing so due to lack of sufficient funds, this will have a huge impact on the market, as over 20% of their current online wagers are made with credit cards. They've also banned the use of bonuses for new player accounts, which is something that DraftKings is currently doing. In the UK, advertising is banned before 9 p.m. And in Europe, in Belgium, and the Netherlands, all public advertising will be essentially banned starting this summer. And so this can have huge potential financial consequences for DraftKings. As you've seen in 2023 alone, you've already incurred $35 million in litigation costs. So there have been multiple lawsuits against DraftKings for a number of reasons, but I'd like to highlight this recent ongoing lawsuit that started just in December 2023. So this $1,000 bonus offer that we're mentioning, there's now a class action lawsuit against you because they're claiming that it's unfair, deceptive, and predatory because of that fine print requirement. And so the lawsuit claims that the makers of addictive products should take special precautions to minimize the risks. So your legal costs are increasing disproportionately to user growth. So if we look at this graph here, you can see that your litigation dollars spent per user has increased to $5 per user in 2023 and has the potential to climb as the regulations change and there are more public concerns that become known. So a more ethical approach that avoids litigation could save you millions of dollars, such as that $35 million that you spent on litigation last year alone. And so currently, when we look at where you are on the ethical spectrum, this is where you are here, so legalistic. So while your current practices are obeying the law, they're not doing more for player protection if we consider them under an ethical lens. So DraftKings should address ethically questionable practices to get ahead of regulation and prevent that risk of potential future lawsuits.
So what does this mean for the business? Well, enhancing consumer trust in the industry is critical for DraftKings expansion. So future expansion will require buy-in from multiple competitor stakeholders. Ultimately, right now, you're facing several hurdles in the industry with your stakeholders, primarily with a vote in California recently where 80% of voters voted against legalizing online sports gaming for California. This was due to the public perception of the risk associated with the industry. Next, politicians. We see that New York is looking to ban all online gaming advertisement. Again, because of the current deceptive nature of it, as well as it being so prevalent in front of consumers. And lastly, even within sports industries, we're seeing the NCAA wanting to remove gaming from its sports. However, if player protection is implemented, this will build trust with their stakeholders, allowing them to continue their growth and operating, providing the great product that they are today. And so why do we know this? Well, 76% of consumers have an affinity to ethically responsible companies. And so strong player protection will then lead to that faith in the safeguards that are intended by the law, as well as put forth by the companies choosing to protect their consumers. And ultimately, the legalization in more states, primarily looking at that California market, changing the minds of those voters. And so we see that DraftKings is actually an industry leader in these categories for responsible behavior. However, because it's such, and so ethical expansion can actually help capture more of this market share. And so we look at DraftKings' influence in the market and how they can take a leadership role. Well, currently, DraftKings controls 32% of market share, second to only FanDuel. Well, let's see where FanDuel's market share is going, down. And most recently, they were in court trying to legalize advertising on college campuses, which is currently illegal. And seeing the NCAA's displeasure with the industry stems from those issues. So DraftKings is growing their market share and can use that for positive influence. Next, they're involved and a founding member in the Responsible Online Gaming Association and can use that to help influence the industry as a whole. So while the competitive landscape and rapidly growing industry have been contributors to why DraftKings has made some of these poor ethical decisions, they need to act in a manner to reposition themselves ethically as a leader within the market. And so we see that DraftKings actually has a good code of ethics that they have spelled out. However, there is a little bit of disconnect between action and what is being said. And so when they're asking their employees and officers to act with integrity, to observe both the form and spirit of the law, we want to help ensure that this is a possibility and comes to fruition. So let's take a look at the actual value of customer lifetime value over a longer period of time. Right now, we see that high-risk gamblers have a very short lifetime value with 4 years of spend and then burnout because of the financial implications to them, where we can actually extend this life cycle. It is more beneficial for the customer and the company financially, as well as in a responsibility to society as a whole, where we see that there's actually $45,000 more value to increase longevity of customer lifetime value.
So how can DraftKings protect consumers and promote responsible gaming while protecting the shareholder goals? So we looked at more mature markets, such as the ones in Europe, to come up with some recommendations. So Svenska Spel, a Swedish operator, has used with great success pop-up warnings that interrupt the state of play and trigger usage of self-reflection tools, comparing yourself anonymously to other players' usages. This really helps bring home, even to at-risk gamblers, the scope of their play. We're also recommending adding bonuses for consumers to actually take part in their own training for responsible gaming. Right now, you provide tools and identify it, but don't really provide the incentive for them to really buy in. And so this is great. We're providing more tools, but as we've said, tools for players at risk are not enough. You have to backstop it with a responsible gaming support team. You already do a phenomenal amount of data analysis on player betting patterns, and using this, you can also use it to identify at-risk and high-risk players. And then we recommend starting an extra department with additional employees to work with those consumers directly. Once you've established this, you need to update your marketing and use your leading position in the Responsible Online Gaming Association to change the practices industry-wide. So first, you need to be clear on your incentive qualifications. We flag this as a legal risk throughout, and removing that fine print is absolutely critical. And then secondly, you need to stop offering bonuses to at-risk players. As you can see, there's legislation coming in other jurisdictions, and it will certainly be coming to the US soon. So being a market leader in this will help you improve your reputation in advertising clarity. And then you can bring this to the rest of the industry through your influence in the Responsible Online Gaming Association. So by implementing these safeguards and providing players the additional tools and backstopping them, you've brought yourself to a much more ethical standpoint. And this addresses the ethical concerns that you have and elevates you within the industry. Pass it over to Ray. Thanks.
So let's look at some of the cost drivers of our solution. Right now, we're recommending that you move to 160 support team workers by 2026 to adapt with the growing market. Next, let's look at some of the marketing costs. So right now, we're hoping that you will reallocate some of your marketing spend, which is quite significant, on these responsible advertisements, reducing fine print and putting that as part of your advertisement and using it to test with consumers to see that it is actually effective. There will also be a tech spend. Utilizing your current investment in AI to understand the data that's coming through, to be able to better protect your employees using algorithms rather than just solely base this on human capital. And lastly, influence to change the industry. We know that this will take money, and so we are recommending to create a team of lobbyists to work with the Responsible Online Gaming Association and its members to shift the ethical position of the entire industry, because we understand that you can't do this alone and that customer churn is possible if you don't have buy-in from the industry. And so looking at how these costs are offset, this is actually an affordable solution, considering that you currently have over $3 billion in operational costs every year. And we're looking at a total 3-year spend of $60 million. And these costs will also be offset. We made the assumption that this will be able to reduce your legal costs by 50%. When we look at the class action lawsuit, which has been a significant portion of the $35 million in litigation spend, we would have been able to reduce that by having effective advertising and showing what the actual content was of that advertisement. As well, looking at sustainable revenue growth of that increased customer lifetime value, you will actually be able to generate more sustainable revenue. And so we predict a 3-year payback period for this initial investment, as well as you will increase your consumer trust and the public perception, allowing you to expand. And so when we look at the ethical impacts, by prioritizing consumer well-being, DraftKings will actually be able to reaffirm their commitment to their customers. They'll be able to encourage ethical innovation through a customer-centric lens, putting them back at the forefront and taking back some of that onus of responsible gaming from the customer, as well as raise provider responsibility for customer well-being throughout the industry, working with ROGA, so that as a whole, the industry is becoming more ethically inclined to protect its consumers.
So you brought us here today to address how you can protect consumers and promote responsible gaming while protecting your shareholder goals. So we provided you with some solutions around focusing DraftKings on the player, via controls and additional internal training, and then also by leading the industry change with your responsible gaming and marketing. So this will help you achieve your goals of upholding the spirit of player protection laws, and it will also help you truly empower players to control their habits. And this will also ensure that you're actually operating in accordance with the DraftKings Code of Business Ethics, both in the technicalities and the spirit of your ethical code. Thank you for having us here today, and we're open for questions.
Thank you. You have 9 seconds left. Well done. So I will set this for 20 minutes, and we'll continue in our rooms. So you're asking us to move along a continuum that you said in effect that we're acting as we legally should, but that's where we're stuck. And you want to nudge us up the incline, and you're appealing to what motives? I mean, we're business people.
So as Rainey mentioned, there are a number of legal costs that you're currently incurring because players are concerned that there are not enough player protections for them. And they're also concerned that there's a gap between the true intent of the law and the true intent of your business code of ethics, and that you're not actually necessarily operating in the spirit with them. So for example, of the current lawsuit against your $1,000 bonus, part of your responsible gambling pledge is to provide responsible advertising. And half of that is meeting both the state regulations, so that's the technicality, but the other half of that is that you, DraftKings as a company, have pledged that you will not mislead consumers with the fine print. And so by having these types of ads, while you're meeting the technical laws, you're not necessarily upholding the spirit of those laws.
So let's take a look quickly at the financials. We understand that you need to drive profit. This is important. You're on a journey right now for profitability. You've incurred losses. You do have great revenue, but there are a lot of increasing costs as well. And so we're looking at those legal costs. So yes, this is a $60 million solution, but let's look at what you're actually able to save and generate through this solution. So we're expecting by 2030 that you'll have almost $238 million in increased value from those customers, as well as reduced legal costs of almost 75 million. So that is actually helping you along your journey to profitability. Yes, there is some initial spend, but if we're looking at the longevity of the industry, which you've already been able to 5x your share value in 4 years, through this longevity, you're actually becoming more profitable.
So this is a business proposition.
No, it's not just a business proposition, but there needs to be a business element to it. Ultimately, as a company, you have to be able to operate in order to provide the service. So if you want to keep providing the service within the regulated market, if any of these companies, as a whole industry, you want to keep providing these services and taking the harm out of users going to illicit gambling services, there has to be some profitability. Ultimately, it's about a balance between legality, ethics, and business.
And so by operating your business more ethically, you can actually see a greater return on revenue. So as Rainey mentioned, right now you're having some costs from lawsuits, and you're also having customers self-exclude because they run into financial problems on your platform. So by operating in a more ethical manner, it's actually will lead you to more greater business success in the future.
So I want to jump in real quick on a money question for y'all, and kind of drilling down into what you were just talking about. So in light of the $3.7 billion in revenue that DraftKings collected in 2023, 35 million in legal fees, or even 10 times that for the sake of argument, it just seems like the cost of doing business. Why should we care, especially when litigation is actually a source of free press?
So one of the reasons you should care is, you have to graph the legal, so, as we showed in the legal section, your litigation costs are actually spiking super heavily. So right now, you're only at $35 million. Maybe that's just cost of doing business at this point. But the more troubling piece is the litigation dollars per user. As your users increase, and if this rate also increases, as we're projecting it to, based on the advancing regulations, that litigation cost can become very impactful to your overall operations.
Does the
And-
tax, to follow on to that, does the tax revenue and the share price growth justify the business model?
The tax, sorry, guys, it's a little bit hard to hear on the speaker. Do the tax revenue and share price justify the business model
Correct.
of our
So-
proposed solution?
Sorry, just to clarify, does the tax revenue that is going to states and share price justify their current business model or the proposed business model?
I'd say either. So I guess the point of the question is, if we change our business model or business operating practices, do we potentially jeopardize both share value and tax revenue collection?
So, I guess to answer it, that is a two-part question. Initially, we would say that the harm reduction is not sufficient when you're trying to balance the benefit of tax revenue and the shareholder benefit is not sufficient to offset the harm you're causing consumers. But with these ethical adaptations to your business model, you'll have reduced the harm sufficiently without overly impacting both that shareholder value, as we've shown, there's a way for you to maintain that shareholder value and also stay on side with the tax revenue associated.
And while there is a large, gamblers who are either at risk or at high risk do tend to spend more than the average gambler. However, we need to think about this long term and not so much in the short term. So by helping those at-risk gamblers gamble responsibly, their short-term spend may decrease, but again, as Remy showed, their customer lifetime value will grow. And from my over a decade in the gaming industry, it's definitely industry best practices to think about that sustainable long-term growth. Because if you grow really quickly, then you might just kind of burn out the industry and burn out your players. So you want to make sure that you keep your players in there for the long haul, and by operating ethically and responsibly, you can help grow your market share and grow your business over the long haul.
I have three questions here from Judge Westerhoff. At what age can a person legally gamble? Question one. Question two, how do people pay for their gambling habits today? And three, do you know how many people commit suicide due to gambling every year?
Okay, we might have to get you to maybe repeat some of them in order. So the first one, so here we have on this slide, so there's a 1 in 5 high-risk gamblers attempt suicide. So that's definitely obviously a really severe long-term consequence. It's hard to put a dollar figure on that. So while we're here talking about your business operations, it's also about your business code of ethics and how you want to operate your business. So that's a very large factor to consider. It's hard to you can't put a price tag on someone's life.
And just to quantify that, Mark, you're asking for exactly how many, based on the 20% and the 2% of high-risk gamblers, that would work out to, in the US, approximately 5,000 attempt suicide per year, but don't know exactly how many succeed.
And how do people pay for their gambling habits today?
So definitely, ideally, it's with those leisure funds. And so we did see a big spike in gambling spend during the pandemic because people, weren't spending money on travel, weren't spending, a lot of people were spending money on home renovations, but there's still a decrease in spend in travel and restaurants and things like that. And so we did see spend go up a lot. However, when we look at those at-risk and high-risk gamblers, they're sometimes taking out loans to pay for their bets. They're asking family and friends for help to pay for their bets. And so that's what we're really concerned with, is when people are gambling outside of their means and looking to other sources to support their funds. And then just your last question, the legal betting age in the US is 21.
He's 21.
So this is a lot to think about, and I guess I would say that you have very compelling arguments for half of my business problem. I get the sense that we need to have more trust with our customers because then they stick around. And I thought that your chart about litigation dollars per user is compelling because basically it's saying I'm getting sued faster than I'm getting profit. So the more I grow, the more I'm going to get sued, and my situation is not improved. On the other hand, I keep coming back to the point that if I've lost $800 million on 3.2 billion in revenue, I have an enormous business problem. I am hemorrhaging money. So I see the point that a more ethical approach will be good business to a certain extent, and keeping around my customers long term. I like that. We need vastly more customers because we're not making any money. We are nowhere. What is 800 divided into 3.2? It's like a 20%, 25% operating loss. I am nowhere near profitable. So I struggle with how to balance these two compelling points. I don't know necessarily that you have any thoughts about that, but at the same time, we are trying to be more ethical in our advertising. We need to reach vastly more people to be able to run this business. This might be beyond the scope of your presentation, but my business does not exist in a vacuum. I would love to know why FanDuel's marketing share is dropping while ours is growing. Are they worse at handling high-risk customers, or are they charging the wrong price or something like that? But part of our solution will have to be, what is FanDuel and my other competitors, what are they doing? And that gives us the space to figure out what we have to do to make money. Maybe it's going to be some of the ethics here, but it might also be other views or actions.
Absolutely. So I think there's some context that will need to be set for this. So ultimately, your losses dropped by 40% over the last year. They were at about $1.25 billion last year with less revenue. So you're starting to offset some of those costs. And that's because essentially it is a young industry. So there's also been some major acquisitions. Most recently, you purchased Jackpot, which is online lottery. So with some of these acquisitions and expansion of market, you're able to use some cross gaming customers to try out new products. And so it's the protection of these new customers that is important because everything's happening so rapidly. So a lot of these costs that you're incurring operationally are the initial setup. So because online sports betting, there's a lot of issues around fraud, money laundering, as mentioned by Matt. There's several safeguards that need to be set for other things as well. We're focusing on really the ethical aspect of it. So this is for future expansion as well. As discussed with California, they're one of the most populous states in the United States. The amount of consumers that can be attracted to DraftKings through this expansion is enormous. And we're not saying that this legislation is going to happen, this legislation change is going to happen next year. It is a slow process. And that's why when we're looking at this growth, it's slowly growing over time because of this. So it is something that there needs to be expectations set with shareholders to understand how you are actually increasing your profitability. But same with the fact that 76% of consumers have an affinity for ethical products. It is about setting that ethical stage as well. So it's not just about business, because you'll actually be able to attract more customers moving into California based on the fact that you are an ethical leader in the industry. So when we're looking at FanDuel, the context there is that they're owned by Flutter Industries, which is actually a larger corporation. So coming in, it was easier for them to attract initial interest, where DraftKings is actually supplying a lot of very good products. So a good amount of gaming choices in the sports book industry are based on what you're offering your customers in terms of odds, user interface. DraftKings has that. So there's a lot of the business practices that you have that will actually continue to increase your market share, while FanDuel's and MGM bet will continue to go down. So now let's focus, that's why we're here today, is help you focus on those ethical practices and how by shaping the industry and being the industry leader, you'll continue to grow that market share, especially if we're looking at new markets and the existing markets. I mean, the 6 states that are looking at legalizing sports gaming in the next year.
And just to quickly add on that, as we've seen lately with the women's basketball, interest in female sports is growing rapidly. But with that, there is, equality concerns, but also again, that same player base that's concerned with equality is also concerned with ethics. So as Remy mentioned, the large majority of consumers are interested in spending with an ethical company. So you have a huge opportunity as more women are becoming interested in sports. There's a good chance they're also interested in engaging with sports at that exciting level of betting. So by operating as an ethical company, you can bring on this huge additional subset of consumers. Whereas right now it's predominantly male consumers interested in sports betting.
Caroline Westerhoff has a question. Are there mechanisms in place today to help consumers protect themselves from gambling addictions?
So there's a lot of regulated tools that are required to be provided, and DraftKings does provide all of those. So those are things such as deposit limits, only being able to add so much into your account at one time, or time limits of only being able to spend so much time on the app at once, and those kind of controls. There's also like enforced cool-off periods where you're saying, I don't want to bet for a week or 2 months. You can put it in, and DraftKings will actually deny you access to your account for a period of time. So those are some of the controls that are available right now. But as we've talked about, those put all of the responsibility on the consumer to opt into using those. And those high risk and at risk consumers aren't equipped to take advantage of those.
And I could opt back out of that, right? I mean,
No,
I could,
you can't, that's a legal portion.
Yeah.
That is actually set by the state. So if you say you want to exclude yourself for life, they can never let you gamble again.
Okay.
On their platform.
All right.
And so there are some issues with that because some people do make impulsive decisions with it, not actually thinking about it. And so if they're excluded from regulated gaming, where do they go? And so there are some tools that gaming researchers have put forth of more efficient ways to help consumers protect themselves. And these 6 things that is part of our tech spend, is implementing this through your AI and algorithms to actually help point these out so that not all of the onus is on the customer to make those decisions.
And I'm sorry, jumping in real quick. Did you say it is the right and the possible action of DraftKings to essentially turn off a user's access?
No, so right now, users have the option to opt in to turn off their own access. DraftKings does not unilaterally prevent access to their platform. We're recommending as part of the support team to be able to have kind of coaches reach out to discuss with users if they're operating in an at-risk manner, whether or not they should look at that option. But we're not suggesting DraftKings unilaterally terminates users at any point.
And just to, I think, clarify there. So while the time limits, DraftKings does not have the right to override those time limits. However, the consumer does. So if you self-exclude, that's for life. But if I say today, I say my time limit for gaming is 1 hour. I can't then decide I want to game more and adjust my time limit for today. I can adjust it and it's now effective tomorrow. So as someone who's at risk for gaming, I may try to set a time limit, but then it's quite easy to change it and set a new higher limit that just starts the next day.
I've studied the consumer credit industry, and the same audience, young males, impulsive buyers, who get themselves into trouble and commit suicide because of their credit balance. So it's not gambling quite, but it's a parallel problem. And the question in the Harvard case study that I did was whether bankers have a responsibility in their pushing out of credit cards at colleges in the freshman year, to counsel financially these new customers. And am I hearing you correctly that you're building some counseling into this picture?
That's correct. The intent of that support team with the new employees is to be able to provide some of that counseling. As you're saying, that is a very analogous ethical situation. And in fact, gambling could be the cause of someone looking for a credit card. And so we're really looking to do our part so that, and DraftKings can do their part, so that they're not actually contributing to that separate ethical issue, and really provide that support and a little bit of counseling to those at-risk consumers.
And that's, as Eli mentioned, if you are going to continue with offering that $1,000 sign-up bonus, we think it could be a great ethical choice to only award it to them after they've gone through the responsible gaming training as part of your sign-up. So you're rewarding them for playing responsibly.
Thank you. We're out of our roles now. We're just ourselves. And it's now open for the judges to share their reflections on your presentation.
Well, it is interesting because, to me personally, number one, because I hate online gaming. And I never thought they should have made it legal. I don't like the idea that it exists at all. Like I said before, I think you did a good job crystallizing the point that there is a strong business incentive to behave ethically, or at least try and figure out how to do it better, because that chart about litigation costs per user, like that's the key metric. And I stumbled into saying it, but I think it's very true that the company is getting sued faster than it's making money. And so long as that dynamic is there and that curve isn't bent, I don't care how fast they move, it's not going to make a difference. Are you undergrads?
No, we're graduates.
Graduate students? Okay. Because I do think that some of if you fleshed out the business and the financial and legal implications a bit more, and I get that you're not financiers or lawyers, but like there's a lot there that I think you're pointing in the right direction. I'm not entirely sure how far down the direction, but when you said it, litigation costs estimated to fall by 50%. First thing I thought was, I bet my outside counsel would say that's wrong. And if that's wrong, and maybe it is right, I don't know where did that number come from, you know?
Well, we're looking at what their direct legal costs to operating activities are.
Yeah.
And that is the majority of them. So I mean, I think inherently they're going to face litigation costs because of the industry that they're in.
Yeah.
But it's safe to say that this class action lawsuit, which would be primarily what that 35 million is from an initial expectation of what they'll need to pay out. Because they're,
Yeah, it's fine.
it's just, there's the prepaid cost of what they think would be the likelihood that they will pay out would be avoided because of putting in more appropriate marketing. Because there's no case for a class action if you're clearly stating that the, $1,000 bonus is subject to these.
And then in terms of that, like 50% save, like that would bring them back in line with the kind of original as they're ramping up.
Okay.
Like a couple dollars per user spend that they had at the kind of the beginning of that chart before they really start spiking up. And that's partly because, as Remy said, like it's a new business. And so like it takes a little while for people to use it enough to have something to sue about as well. So.
Well, that's true.
And that's 50% over the entirety of that graph, so to 2030. It's not initially, because right now there will be litigation costs, and as they're expanding before this is fully implemented, that would be the case.
I guess my point is just that I would want more meat behind some of the assumptions on the finance and business side, because if either of them turn out to be wrong, then my business calculations might go in a radically different direction. All of that said, still the fundamental premise that you have to think about it more ethically to get more good business. The converse being, we could make more business by being jerks and just settling the lawsuits. Like clearly that's not viable. So you are pointed in the right direction, and I like that a lot. And then the rest is just how far do we get there? How do we get there? Like, that could be figured out by the voters.
I'll rattle off a handful of comments here. I think it would have been helpful for a very clear impact statement in the very beginning of your presentation to know exactly kind of from the top what you're proposing and then the explanation of how you got there. I didn't hear the positives of legitimized gambling versus the alternative or pre-online gambling, which is bookies or, under the table type gambling. I did like the lifetime value statement of customers. I think that's actually a really important thing to key in on. You do want to keep customers as long as possible. I think also you could have benefited from examples of historic industries that would have been helpful. So what happened in cigarettes, alcohol, credit cards in terms of advertising, litigation, things like that. I think you could have pointed out the opportunity to be a leader in an industry to create a corporate override function that allows DraftKings to promote counseling on the way to canceling access to their platform. It's a very aggressive stance, but if you're truly committed to preventing people from, upending their lives, you might want a nuclear option there, at least to propose it, since you are consultants. And then just a formatting thing, colors on the solution cost slide were hard to see the difference between the ROGA information and the new market development. And then also I wanted to know more about what you meant by ethical innovation. Does this mean bet on anything responsibly? DraftKings becoming a private market maker. I bet my brother however much money that I can make more free throws on our backyard basketball court, something like that. Thank you.
Thanks.
And Caroline Westhouse says, don't internal controls come too late? I don't, in the presentation.
Oh, yeah. I think that
It's a question. But,
something to think about. I don't know if that kind of relates to what Justin was saying there about kind of putting our impact right up front.
I have some comments. I thought you had an awful lot of information on each slide, and sometimes the slides went by too fast. It was hard for me as a viewer to absorb that information. Then it went by, and after a while, I get slide fatigue, and then I get pissed. Pardon my French. And I want to pay attention to what you're saying, and I don't want to be distracted by the slide. I want the slide to complement what you're saying. So if I were you doing this, you're not going to use slides anymore in this competition, I know, but in future uses of this, you put in a lot of work on this. There's no doubt in my mind. I would find a way to communicate these wonderful ideas in a more concise way.
I agree.
Just for the sake of your audience. That's one point. I think analogies with other forms of addiction are useful. And they help your audience, help bring your audience in. And those forms of addiction, obviously, are alcohol and drugs, but there's also, the credit card thing. And there's interesting ways in which the purveyor of the addictive substance or practice or whatever it might be carries a responsibility. And society naturally expects that ethical responsibility to be fulfilled. And sometimes we need to pay attention to that, not give a free pass. I think your responses during the Q&A where we stayed in our roles were very good. I think you played your roles well. You were on top of the subject matter. And I want to compliment you for that. Going forward, you've got your 10-minute presentation tomorrow on ethics. My little quasi gotcha statement earlier is not a gotcha statement at all. You've got a really nice argument for the economic, with respect to my colleague here, the economic and ethical value of what you're proposing. And who says ethics has to hurt? I mean, there's no law that says that responsible people have to go bankrupt. And in your case, it may well be that there's a competitive advantage to integrity. And I don't see why you need to back off of that. And I was pushing you on that subject, but pushing you because I think you have an argument. So that might be worth reflecting on for tomorrow.
Somebody else framed that point that Ken just rose in a very nice, succinct way that you might want to consider. We were talking about how do we use AI in a business, but they stopped and said, don't forget, doing nothing is also a choice. So you could say something like, well, consider the alternative where we don't do anything. I think that would probably get a lot of board directors' attention, that they sometimes forget sitting on their ass. It's also a choice and a quote.
Okay. Any other comments?
No, thank you for the feedback. Some of those
Thank you.
are pretty excellent.
Yeah.
Congratulations. You did
Thank you.
a very nice job. And